Welcome to Theme 5 of Participatory Fluency, Rights, Duties, and Perceptions. Today we're going to learn a little bit about how to communicate using a grammatical mode which is important to know in English, and most people classify it as an intermediary skill, which is using modal verbs. These are verbs that are varied and will determine the context of many kinds of situations where you need to either give opinion or talk about possibilities or talk about abilities, and a series of things in which you will find yourself surrounded by situations where you will attach extra meaning to the verbs you're referring to, and so studying how they work will be important for you as you go through your journey of communicating more effectively and finding connections with which you can establish meaningful communication. Now, the first two aspects that we need to keep in mind when we talk about these verbs and these kinds of situations, which is the main objective here, is the concept of possibilities. If you talk about, for example, something like freedom of speech, it's important to keep in mind that there are certain things that you can say and certain things that you can't say, because there are rules established to make it a safer environment for you to interact with everyone if these things are not allowed and these things are. The question of freedom of speech is important because it's very much in vogue to discuss this theme, but also some people are trying to establish the common principles for everyone to follow when it comes to interacting with social media. And it matters a lot to say that these are not things that started today. These are things that from decades ago were taken into place and established through analysis of data and analysis of context in order to establish the expectations for the internet user and for common people when they visit the internet, what they're allowed to do, what they're allowed to say, what they're expected to find, etc. But also, freedom of speech refers to the common goals of being a citizen in the world, which means you can protest, you can talk about a certain aspect of your community, you can produce art, you can make all sorts of contributions at your workplace, and you should be free to say what you really think without a threat of reprehension. So giving your opinion and positioning yourself in the world is important, but there are some things you can do and some things you can't do. For example, when you start to insult the other, it is a problem in terms of how society works, and it is surely a bigger problem when this insult becomes physical violence. So to prevent this kind of thing, there have been created rules where you can say certain things, but you can't say other things. If we come to the context of technology to look at this, we'll see that a recently made social network called Threads, owned by the company Meta, started to alert people that this or that post may be inappropriate. And so this was a mechanism created to bar certain kinds of speech from being spread all over the platform. This is a mechanism that prevents instead of censor. It's arguably a better kind of mechanism than just taking down all sorts of contributions of people who are not following the rules or are saying things that they can't say. For example, when you're a kid, your mom will say that you can't do certain things, and you will just understand from the context and from the tone of your mom and dad's voice that this is not allowed, this is bad. If you're talking to a dog, for example, you'll say no, and the dog will understand that this is not allowed, this is not good, this is bad, and so they should refrain from doing these things. So what you can and what you can't do are things that are important to discuss. Of course, there are also terms of abilities that we can talk about. The verb can and can't is used to talk about things that we are able to do because we have the capacity or the ability to do them. For example, you can say that I can't travel to the United States because I don't have a passport. In this situation, you are talking about something that is not possible to do. And this is the context. Imagine not being able to travel to the United States. What a disappointment that would be. So our intention is to cover situations where you can talk about the disappointment and the frustration most of all, and be more explicit and more free to talk about these things, these aspects, instead of focusing on the grammatical norm and the fact that you're saying can or can't correctly or not. It is our intention to find a person with whom you can communicate your frustration of not being able to go to the United States and hearing something back. Well, why don't you save up to make up for a passport, and how is the process? What do you have to do in order to get a passport? Is it different than the United States? You're going to find out together. And so these things are important in the process of interaction. One thing that you can find in the workplace, for example, is that your boss will come to you and say, you can't be here 15 minutes late every day. This causes a bad impression, and this is bad for productivity. Everyone follows the rules. You're the only one not following the rules. So you should be able to do what everyone else is doing. And then you say, okay, I'll try to do that. You're having personal problems, but your boss is saying you can't. In this context, you need to explain to your boss why you're having problems or why you can't be there on time. For example, traffic, or situations at home, or problems with sleeping medication. These are just some of the examples that you may face in this kind of situation. You need to be able to explain yourself rather than just adhering to your boss's words and rules and saying, well, since I can't, I'm not going to do it anymore. You should be able to explain yourself, argue, negotiate, and try to find a solution that's more flexible for you if that's the case. Or if it's in another situation, you should change your schedule and start working in a different time so that you don't have this kind of problem. In another situation, we'll find the modal verbs should and must. These are connected to obligations and necessities. In this case, you'll find something like, for example, if you go to the United States in the winter, you should bring some coat because it's very cold. So the necessity of bringing something to feel warm is what you're trying to express. In this kind of scenario, you are talking about the situation of traveling and the necessities that you have in daily life. So this will be important to talk about. You should bring a coach. Or in any other case, while you're traveling, should can be used to talk about any kind of suggestion that you give in order to have a good time at the place where you're visiting. We should buy some wine. This could be fun. We should buy some wine is a suggestion. So this can be any kind of thing that you can turn to your friend and say, we should do this because it will be fun. So using these modal verbs, and will is another example, will give you a more broad understanding of how certain verbs can be added to another context. Must reveals a more serious approach to things. For example, you'll find this in formal documentation and formal communication. All passengers must wear seat belts. You'll find this also, sorts of transport vehicles, right? All passengers must wear seat belts. It's an obligation. It's something that out of safety measures everybody has to do. But going a little further, you have may and might, which are talking about possibilities. May and might are very commonly used when you're talking about things that might occur in the future, but you don't know, you don't have an exact certainty about them. And some people will go as far as to say that may and might have different levels of probability. But this varies, and normally people say that might has less of a certainty than may, but this varies a lot, and depending on the context, one is going to be used and another is not. I might be able to go to the beach tomorrow. I just have to see if my daughter is going to have to go to school, or is going to have to be helped at school. If you want to help your daughter with the school homework, you'll not be able to go to the beach because you have to stay home. So I might be able to go to the beach. If you say that, you're talking about a possibility in your routine, something that you're planning to do with your friends, but which maybe will not be possible. Because maybe is a very common word, try to remember this as you remember the cases of may and might. Might is used as an alternative to may. And then you have can and could, using them as possibilities. I could try to see if I have a spare phone. Imagine that your nephew, for example, doesn't have a phone anymore because it broke, and you say, I might have a spare phone at home. I could try to see if I find one for you. Then with this, you're trying to say that there's a remote possibility that you have a spare phone at home. So you will try to do your best to find a phone to replace for the broken phone. The cases vary very much, and to be able to use this alternatively will make you aware of the context surrounding them and aware of necessities of supplementing the context with more information. So knowing a little bit more about how these modal verbs work will make you a more effective communicator. In the next section, we'll talk about medium, audience, coherence, and context. I'll see you there.